The Western thing was because I had never read any Westerns. For some reason, I just never thought it would be something that I'd get into. And then Pat Anderson, who writes for the Washington Post, went, "You have got to read Lonesome Dove." And I trust his taste. I've read his reviews. I trust this guy on books. And so I picked up Lonesome Dove, and man, what a book. What a book and a half. And then I, picked up True Grit from there on, and on a more modern note, The Sisters Brothers, and went, these are great books. And they explore fascinating territory. And not just that, but a lot of these tropes would do really well transposed onto a West of Ireland setting, because there are things in common. There's that this harsh terrain that is demanding a huge mental and physical toughness on anybody who wants to make a living out of it. And there's this sense of great beauty, harsh beauty, but great beauty as well, and of the landscape being intricately intertwined with people's day-to-day lives. But there's also this sense of, you've got a place that is so far removed from the centers of power, both geographically and culturally, that the people living there have a feeling like, the power mongers don't really care about us. They don't understand our lives. They don't care about our lives. If we want a functioning society, we're going to have to set our own rules and enforce them ourselves. And that is a line that runs through a lot of Irish drama, oddly. You've got like great classics like The Field and The Playboy of the Western World, where it is that. It's this like small rural community that's so distant from the main centers of power that it just has its own society set up here and its own rules that are very stringently enforced. And then a stranger comes into town and everything changes around him. He becomes a catalyst. So I started thinking about that. The stranger blowing into town. There was so many Westerns happen. And he's probably got a past. He comes into the saloon and, maybe he's got secrets, maybe he doesn't. But either way, he's going to be a catalyst. Things are going to change around him. He might shoot the evil sheriff and set the town to rights, or he might shoot the good sheriff and everything's going to come tumbling down, but he's going to change things. And I thought about setting that in a West of Ireland setting. And that in a way was why it turned out to be third person, because I'd just come off writing Witch Hunt, which is a very introspective book. Like the main locus of the action is inside the narrator's head, quite literally, in some ways. And it's a lot about his thoughts and his thought process and how he analyzes those and tries to figure out what his mind is really deep down, who he is, what he is. And while I really enjoyed writing that, by the last 2 weeks, I was kind of going, dude, pull it together, get a job, and take your head out of your belly button. So I wanted to write somebody who was very action-based. And that fit in really well, I think, with Westerns. Because in Westerns, a lot of the focus is not on who thinks what or who feels how. It's on who does what. It's on the actions. And so Cal is a character who feels like what you think isn't that important, whether you think the right thing. It's what you do. It's action. And that means if you set a book in first person, right, you're implying that what's inside the character's head is important, that you as the reader need to be inside this person, in their mind, in order to get the important part of the book. But I felt like a character like Cal would be going, no, what's in my head is not important. What I do is what matters. And so it would have seemed inappropriate in a weird way to set it in first person. It needed to be third person because the format of the book needed to be shaped by who the character is. And if you are at Cal's shoulder the whole time, because it is close third person, if you're at his shoulder, seeing glimpses into his head, but mainly what he does and says, that's where you belong for this book. It's a book about actions. I like the idea of the detective who's been stripped of everything detective-y. And Cal has deliberately tried to leave behind being a detective. He does not have the faith in the job or in himself as a detective that he used to have. The line in the book is he's come to the realization that one of them, him or the job or both, can't be trusted. So his plan here was to leave it behind, and yet suddenly being a detective is demanded of him. But he has none of the artillery. He can't ring up the tech department and go, listen, can you dump this suspect's phone and find out where he was and who he's been talking to? He can't pull somebody in and interrogate them. He doesn't have a badge. He doesn't have a gun. He doesn't have a partner. He doesn't have, forensics departments at his disposal. He has nothing but whatever's left within himself. So the question becomes, is being a detective to some extent, has it become ingrained in him, whether he likes it or not? And to what extent is he willing to accept that and use it when it's needed? And to what extent was it just trappings that he could take off when he decided to? So that was a lot of fun to play with. What's a detective when he's not a detective anymore? But I also loved the chance to play with the Irish way of not saying things. Because the Irish are so good at that, man. I think to an extent it might be to do with being a post-colonial society. After centuries of what was at times extremely oppressive and repressive British rule, where people had to be quite good at not saying anything because anything you said could get you in very, very deep trouble. So the Irish have a great skill for not saying the thing. And for Cal, this is something that is strange and unintelligible and exasperating, and he has to figure out what the hell people are telling him a lot, because they talk round the thing in slowly decreasing concentric circles until he gets the message. But he's consistently decoding. He's in a place that has all its own codes that it speaks in, and he has to be consistently decoding all these codes. And that was fun to write, that little culture gap going on all the time. I loved writing about Ardnakelty, about this small village where it's not like a city setting. It's not like, if you live in the city, right, you can detach yourself from the people around you. You can just not bother anybody, not like play your music loud or let your dog bark, and you're detached. There's no way to detach in a small rural community. You're very tight knit. Everything you do has an impact. And I thought that was fascinating. And I thought a place like that is going to have more secrets and more stories. I kept thinking there were also more Western tropes that I could play with that would overlay really well on this. So when it came to The Hunter, I'd been thinking about, you know, the Western trope of there's gold and then there are hills. Now that doesn't seem like a perfect fit for Ireland, but weirdly enough, there actually have been huge numbers of ancient gold artifacts found in Ireland. And there have been little mini gold rushes over the centuries. And even up until today, you still get companies forming to search for gold in the Irish mountains. So I thought, wait a minute, the gold rush trope from Westerns would actually map quite well onto the west of Ireland. And I'd also been thinking about that trope about, you know, when the adventurer comes home, the ne'er-do-well who's been away, the rascal, and he comes home and he's brought trouble home with him. And I thought, well, Trey's absent father, Johnny, what if he came home and he brought with him an English millionaire and a plan to find gold in the mountains and make the whole townland rich? And he wanted Trey on side for that plan. What would that do to the fragile relationship that Cal and Trey and Lena have been building up over the last couple of years if this sudden bombshell, this grenade gets detonated in the middle of that relationship and suddenly Trey is pulled different ways? So that's, yeah, in The Hunter, that's what happens. They have this relationship built up. And then Trey's dad comes home. He's got plans, he's got a gold rush, and he's brought trouble. I was not planning this, but yeah, I thought I was done after The Hunter. And then I went, hang on a second. There's an arc going on with these Ardnakelty books, where the first one is about an outsider, like defining his relationship with this town. And the second one, it's not about Cal himself, it's about three people, Cal and Lena and Trey, all of whom occupy a kind of weird liminal zone where they're not quite outsiders in this place, but they're not quite insiders either. I mean, Cal is now established and accepted, but he's still an American blow-in. And Lena has spent decades deliberately distancing herself from this place because she finds it much too invasive. And Trey, while she's born and brought up in Ardnakelty, she's from that family that every small town has, where the town kind of feels like they're a lot more hassle than they're worth, and it'd be great if they'd move somewhere else. So all of them are on the periphery in this way. So I've got one book about outsiderhood, one book about the periphery, and it kind of felt like it would make sense to have one that finishes off with the experience of being an insider and what that means, what the resonances and the demands and the secrets are of insiderhood. So somehow or other, I seem to have wound up writing a third book about Ardnakelty. I did not plan this.